The dungeons of Ravensmoor Keep were not supposed to have a heartbeat. Wren Ashcombe pressed herself flat against the weeping stone, her lockpicks slick with sweat, and told herself the pulse she felt wasn't fear, it was calculation. Somewhere beyond the iron door her sister was chained like livestock, traded away to settle a debt Wren had never agreed to. She had one knight, one blade, and a map stolen from a drunk guard's belt. What she hadn't accounted for was the shadow that unfolded itself from the dark at the vault's threshold. A man built like a verdict, eyes burning gold in the black, who caught her wrist before her blade ever touched the lock. He didn't call the guards. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply inhaled once deeply and went utterly still, as though the scent of her had rewritten every law he'd ever ruled by. Wren had come to steal a life. She hadn't planned on being claimed by the king whose vault she'd broken into. Chapter 1. Wren Ashcombe had never been afraid of small spaces, but the ventilation shaft beneath Ravensmoor Keep tested even her nerve. She crawled on her elbows through darkness that smelled of tallow smoke and old blood, counting the turns her stolen map had promised, praying the drunk guard she'd lifted it from hadn't lied to save his own skin. 3 months ago her family had owned a modest apothecary at the foot of the mountain, enough coin to keep the winter fires lit and her younger sister Lyra fed and laughing. Then their father's debts he'd hidden from them both, had come due to a rogue lord who did not accept coin as payment. He accepted flesh instead. Lyra had been taken in the night, dragged off in a merchant's cart bound for the keep, sold into the personal household of Ravensmoor's ruler like a bolt of silk. They called him the Rogue King. Not because he had stolen his crown, though some whispered that too, but because he ruled a territory that answered to no council, no treaty, no law but his own snarling will. Wren had heard the stories in every tavern between here and the coast. A wolf larger than a warhorse, a temper that leveled villages, a man who had not smiled since the day his own father's throat had been torn out in a coup 20 years past. He did not care what he was. She cared that her sister's chains rattled somewhere above her, and that tonight was the only night the vault guard rotation left a gap wide enough to slip through. She dropped from the shaft into a corridor lined with iron sconces, her boots silent on stone worn smooth by centuries of soldiers' feet. The map had promised a side passage to the holding cells adjacent to the treasury, where valuable captives, the ones worth ransoming or breaking slowly, were kept close to the king's own vault, under his own eye. That should have warned her. It didn't. She rounded the final corner with her heart a hard, fast drum and her lockpicks already between her fingers, and that was when the shadows at the vault door moved. Not guards. Not torches catching on armor. The darkness itself unfolded, peeled away from the stone like something that had been waiting there long before she arrived, and resolved into the shape of a man easily a head taller than any she'd ever stood near. Broad through the shoulder in a way that spoke of a body built for tearing, not posturing. Dark hair, damp at the temples as though he'd just shifted back from another form entirely. And eyes, gold, molten, catching what little light there was and throwing it back at her like a warning flare. Wren's blade was in her hand before she'd decided to draw it. It didn't matter. His fingers closed around her wrist before the motion finished, and the strength in that grip told her resistance would break bone before it broke free. He didn't shout for the guard. He didn't slam her against the wall, though every line of his body promised he could. Instead he went still, unervingly, dangerously still, his nostrils flaring as he drew one long breath through the narrow space between them. "You," he said, and his voice was low enough to feel in her sternum, "smell like ash and rosemary and something underneath that I have been searching for since before you were born." Wren's mouth went dry. "Let go of me." His grip did not loosen. If anything, his thumb pressed, deliberate, against the thundering pulse at her wrist, as if counting it, as if it were the only true thing in the room. "Say that again," he murmured, and something in his tone had gone from menace to something far more unsettling. "Wonder. Say anything. I want to hear your voice while I understand what has just happened to me." "Tup-to-do. You're the king," Wren said, because it seemed safer to name the danger than to pretend she hadn't recognized it. "You're Alpha Draven Ravensmoor." "I am." He did not release her wrist, but his grip gentled just slightly as though some instinct in him recoiled from the idea of bruising her. "And you are a thief who broke into my vault corridor with a blade meant for my guards and a scent that has stopped me cold in my own halls. Explain yourself before my temper decides you're not worth the trouble of an explanation." She could have lied. She'd planned 3 separate lies on the crawl through the shaft, each more plausible than the last. Standing this close to him with his gold eyes fixed on her like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world, every one of them evaporated. "Hi, sister," she said instead. "Lyra Ashcombe. She was taken 3 months ago to settle a debt our father owed. I came to get her out." Something shifted behind Draven's eyes. Not softening, not yet, but a recalculation, as though he were rebuilding an entire structure of assumptions in real time. "Ashcombe," he repeated. "The apothecary girl. You know her." "I know of a girl kept in the Eastern Wing who does not belong to any household staff I recognize, brought in by a lord who does not answer to me but who trades on my territory because I have allowed weak men to believe I do not notice their cruelty." His jaw tightened. "That will change tonight." Ren's pulse spiked with something dangerously close to hope. "You'll help me." "I will do considerably more than help you." He finally released her wrist, and the loss of his touch left her skin oddly cold, as though her body had already begun keeping score of his warmth against her own. "But first you will tell me why a wolf who has not felt his own heartbeat quicken in 20 years finds himself unable to stop listening to yours." "I don't know what you mean." "No," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I imagine you don't." He turned, and the torchlight caught the sharp line of a scar along his jaw, old and pale, a story she did not yet have the right to ask about. "Come. If your sister is where I believe she is, we do not have until dawn." Ren followed him through corridors that shifted from prisoner's stone to something almost regal. Dark wood, deep red banners bearing a wolf crest, the unmistakable architecture of a man who ruled through fear because he had learned young that mercy got you killed. And yet every guard they passed straightened instinctively, dropped their gaze, moved out of his path without a single word from him. Command that didn't need to be spoken. Power that had simply always been. He stopped her once, in a shadowed alcove between 2 hallways, his hand closing briefly around her upper arm, not restraining this time. Steadying. "When we reach the Eastern Wing," he said low, "stay behind me. Lord Corvin Ashvale is the man who holds your sister's chain, and he is a coward who only ever strikes when he believes he has the advantage. I do not intend to give him one. You know his name. I know every debt owed on my territory. I simply choose most days not to care whose blood is spilled collecting it." His gold eyes found hers in the dark, and for a moment the predator in him receded entirely, replaced by something almost raw. "Tonight I find I care very much." Chapter 3. Lord Corvin Ashvale was smaller than Ren had imagined. A wiry, oil-haired man with a courtier's smile and a merchant's eyes, the kind that priced everything they landed on. He rose from a low couch in the Eastern Wing's receiving chamber when Draven entered, and his smile only flickered for half a second before it recovered, oily and unbothered. "Your Majesty," Corvin said, bowing with theatrical grace. "An honor as always, though I confess I did not expect you to grace my temporary quarters personally. Where is the girl?" Draven's voice held no room for pleasantries. Corvin's gaze slid to Ren, cataloging, and something ugly moved behind his eyes. "Oh. I see. The sister has come to collect. How touching." He gestured lazily toward a curtained doorway. "She is quite well cared for, Your Majesty, I assure you. A debt is a debt. Her father owed me 3 years of unpaid tribute on land he leased from my family's holdings, and when a man cannot pay in coin, he does not pay in daughters," Draven cut in, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Not on my territory. Not while I still draw breath. With respect, Your Majesty, the arrangement was made under the old accords before your father's death when such transactions were. My father is 20 years dead, Corvin, and you dare invoke his name to justify chaining a child." Ren watched the exchange with her heart hammering, but it was Corvin's next words that turned her blood to ice. "She is hardly a child," he said, his smile sharpening into something possessive and cruel. "And I have grown rather fond of her company these past months. In fact, I had begun to consider making the arrangement permanent. A marriage would settle the debt quite cleanly, and secure my claim beyond any court's meddling." The words landed like a slap. Ren's hands curled into fists. "She's 16. Old enough for a betrothal contract which I have already drafted." Corvin's eyes glittered. "Signed, in fact, this very afternoon, by her own hand under my careful guidance." Draven went very still. Ren had seen him controlled before in the corridor, in the moment his fingers had wrapped around her wrist. This was different. This was a stillness that came right before a storm broke a mountainside in half. When he spoke, his voice had dropped so low it barely qualified as sound. You forced a signature from a terrified girl and call it consent. I call it a legally binding contract, Your Majesty, and I would remind you that even a king does not have the authority to void a private betrothal without cause. Cause, Draven said, and the word came out edged with something guttural, something not entirely human, is a coward extorting a debt through a child's fear, and I am the law on this mountain, Corvin. Not you. Never you. He took one step forward and Corvin, for all his oiled confidence, flinched back bodily. Bring her out. No. Or I will forget that I still require your family's trade routes intact, and I will demonstrate exactly what my wolf thinks of men who traffic in children. For the first time, real fear cracked through Corvin's composure. He snapped his fingers toward a servant hovering in the doorway, and moments later the curtain parted. Lyra Ashcombe stepped through, thinner than Ren remembered, a silver collar at her throat that made Ren's stomach lurch violently, her eyes red-rimmed but her chin held with the same stubborn Ashcombe pride that ran through both sisters like a vein of iron. Ren. Lyra's voice cracked. You came. Always, Ren whispered and crossed the room in 3 strides to pull her sister into her arms, ignoring everything else. The king, the coward, the collar that would need to come off before either of them slept easy again. Behind her she heard Draven's voice, quiet and final. Corvin. You have until sunrise to leave my territory. If I find you within these borders after that, the accord protecting your holdings expires with you in it. Chapter 4. The collar came off in the king's own chambers under his own hands, because he would not trust the task to anyone else. Ren stood close as his claws, lengthening only enough to work the delicate lock, retracting the instant the silver clicked free, eased the cursed metal from her sister's throat. Lyra flinched at the touch of his claws near her skin, and Draven paused, gentling his movements with a patience Ren would not have believed him capable of an hour ago. It's silver forged, he said low, examining the collar with something like fury banked behind his eyes before he set it aside. Meant to suppress a wolf's senses, keep a captive disoriented and biddable. She'll ache for a day, perhaps 2. Nothing worse. Thank you, Lyra whispered, rubbing at the raw skin and then glancing between the king and her sister with the particular sharpness of a 16-year-old who missed nothing, added, Why is he helping us? Ren didn't have an answer. Draven did. Because your sister is my mate, he said simply, as though the words weren't a stone dropped into still water. I did not know it until I stood 3 feet from her in a corridor tonight and could not remember how to breathe. Lyra's eyebrows rose to her hairline. Ren felt heat climb her throat. That is not, she started. It is exactly, Draven said, turning to face her fully now that Lyra was safe, precisely that. I have ruled this territory for 20 years without a single soul I did not have to guard against. I have not slept a full night since my father's murder. And tonight a thief with rosemary in her hair broke into my vault to save someone she loved, without a shred of hesitation, without weighing the cost to herself, and my wolf recognized in her the one thing I stopped believing existed. You don't know me, Ren said, though her pulse was doing something treacherous and fast. No, he agreed. But I intend to. Thoroughly. Beginning tonight if you'll allow it, and for considerably longer than tonight if my instincts are correct, and they have never once been wrong about this. Lyra, watching the exchange with poorly hidden delight despite her exhaustion, murmured, I like him. You've known him for 10 minutes. He took off a silver collar without hurting me and threatened to gut the man who chained me. I have very low standards after the last 3 months, but he's already exceeding them. Draven's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough that Ren felt something in her chest tilt sideways at the sight of it. She suspected he did not smile often. She suspected this was perhaps a rare gift, and the realization unsettled her more than his claws or his crown or the low burn of his gold eyes ever could. You should both rest, he said, gesturing to an adjoining chamber. You will want for nothing here. And Corvin will trouble neither of you again. I intend to see to that personally before dawn. And after dawn? Ren asked because some reckless part of her needed to know. Draven's gaze held hers, steady, unflinching, terrifyingly honest. After dawn I intend to court you properly, Ren Ashcombe. Whether you accept that courtship is, for the first time in my life, a question I do not already know the answer to. But I would very much like to find out. Chapter 5. Corvin Ashvale did not leave quietly. 3 nights after the confrontation in the eastern wing, while Ren sat with Lyra in the guest chambers Draven had given them, chambers finer than anything either sister had known, all warm firelight and thick furs, a commotion rose from the lower courtyard that sent every guard in the keep running. Ren reached the balcony in time to see torches moving in formation below, and Draven's voice cutting through the night like a blade, sharp with fury she had not yet heard directed at anything but Corvin himself. He's returned, she breathed. With men, Lyra said grimly, joining her at the rail. He's not leaving without a fight. Cowards like him never do, not once they've been humiliated in front of witnesses. Ren was already moving before she'd fully decided to, racing down the spiral stair with her heart in her throat, ignoring Lyra's protest behind her. She reached the courtyard as Draven shifted, the transformation a blur of motion too fast for her eyes to fully track, bone and muscle rearranging into a wolf the size of a small horse, fur black as pitch, eyes still that same burning gold even in this form. Corvin's mercenaries, a dozen of them hired steel with none of their lord's cowardice, had encircled a knot of Draven's own guard, and in the chaos, Corvin himself had slipped toward the stables, toward escape, dragging behind him something that made Ren's blood run to ice. A second captive. A girl no older than Lyra, silver collar already fastened at her throat, stumbling in Corvin's grip as he hauled her toward a waiting horse. He's taking another one, Ren said, horror rising in her throat. He was never going to stop. He didn't think. She grabbed a fallen guard's dagger from the cobblestones and ran. Draven's massive head turned at the sound of her footsteps, gold eyes flaring with something between fury and terror, and he moved, impossibly fast, closing the distance to Corvin in 3 bounding strides. But Corvin had already seen her coming, already understood the leverage a second hostage provided, and he yanked the terrified girl in front of himself like a shield. Come no closer, Corvin snarled, blade suddenly at the girl's throat, or I open her from ear to ear, king or no king. Draven froze mid-lunge, every muscle in his enormous frame locked rigid. Ren had never seen a predator forced to stillness by anything, and the sight of it, this creature capable of leveling a courtyard held motionless by the threat to an innocent, told her more about the man beneath the wolf than any conversation could have. Let her go, Ren said, stepping forward, dagger raised though her hands shook. Take me instead. I'm the one who humiliated you in front of your own men. I'm the one you actually want. Ren, Draven's growl even in wolf form carried unmistakable warning. You're worth considerably more actually, Corvin said, eyes gleaming with sudden ugly calculation. The king's mate. What wouldn't he pay to have you returned unharmed? Everything, Draven said, and the word came from a human throat now, the shift back to man form instantaneous, violent, his voice raw with a fear Ren had not thought him capable of feeling. I would give you everything, Corvin, and you know it, so let the child go and take the bargain you were offered before I stop being able to promise I won't tear you apart regardless of the cost. Chapter 6. The standoff stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. Corvin's mercenaries had begun to falter under the weight of Draven's guard closing ranks, several already dropping their weapons at the sight of their employer's obvious, sweating desperation. Cowards followed cowards only so far. Drop the girl, Draven said again, low, each word deliberate. And I give you my word as king that you walk out of this courtyard alive. That is the only offer you will receive, and it expires the moment I decide it has. Corvin's eyes darted between the king's rigid fury and Ren's steady, dagger-gripped advance, calculating odds that were collapsing by the second. Whatever courage he'd summoned to return here was draining fast, replaced by the animal instinct of a man who had only ever been brave when he held all the power. He shoved the girl forward, hard enough that she stumbled, crying out, and bolted for his horse. He didn't make it 3 steps. Draven moved like something unleashed rather than released, the shift back to wolf form so fast it barely registered as movement at all, one heartbeat man and the next a black blur that closed the distance and slammed Corvin to the cobblestones with a force that knocked the air from him entirely. Ren caught the freed girl before she fell, wrapping an arm around trembling shoulders, murmuring the same steady reassurances she'd once given Lyra in 100 small crises. Draven did not kill him. Ren saw the moment the decision crystallized. Massive jaws inches from Corvin's throat, a growl that vibrated through the stones themselves, and then with visible wrenching effort the king pulled back. "You gave your word," Corvin gasped, blood trickling from his nose where the impact had struck. "I did," Draven said, voice still half a growl even in this shifted half-human snarl. "You will live. But you will live in exile, stripped of every holding on this mountain, and if I ever learn you have chained another soul to settle a debt as long as you draw breath, I will hunt you to whatever corner of this world you crawl into, and I will not offer mercy twice." He shifted fully back to human form, breathing hard, and turned immediately toward Ren, not toward his own guards, not toward the aftermath of the fight, but toward her as though she were the only true north he possessed. "You could have died," he said, and his hands, when they came up to frame her face, were not entirely steady. "You ran toward a blade at a girl's throat with nothing but a dropped dagger and more courage than sense. You would have done the same. I am cursed with a wolf's hide and claws built for tearing men apart. You had none of that. You had only yourself, and you offered it without hesitation." His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle in a way that contradicted every terrifying thing she'd just watched him do. "Do you understand yet what you are to me, Ren Ashcombe? Do you understand that I would have burned this entire mountain to ash rather than watch that blade reach your throat?" Ren's heart, already hammering from the fight, did something entirely different now, something that had nothing to do with fear. "I'm starting to," she admitted. Chapter 7. The aftermath brought its own complications. Word of the confrontation spread through Ravensmoor's court by morning, and by midday the Alpha King's Council had convened without his summons. A rare enough event that even Draven's steward looked pale delivering the news. Ren stood outside the council chamber's heavy doors, Lyra at her side, both of them freshly bathed and dressed in clothes that felt too fine for either sister to trust fully, listening to the argument rising within. "A common thief, your majesty, breaking into your own vault corridor, and you would elevate her to your Luna's seat?" The voice belonged to an older counselor, sharp with the particular offense of a man who valued bloodlines above bonds. "The mate bond is sacred, yes, but it does not erase the matter of suitability. She has no lineage, no lands, no. She has courage that put every man in this room to shame." Draven's voice cut through, flat and final. "She ran toward a blade to save a stranger's child while my own guard hesitated. Tell me again, Counselor Aldrich, what quality you believe qualifies a woman to stand beside a king, if not that?" "Tradition, your majesty. Tradition installed my father's murderer as his most trusted advisor for a decade before the truth came out," Draven said, and the room went silent at the reference. "I have very little faith left in tradition. I have considerably more faith in the woman who broke into my own fortress rather than beg for help from a king she'd been taught to fear, because she trusted no one but herself to save what she loved. That is the Luna I intend to claim, gentlemen, and I did not gather you here to debate it. I gathered you here to inform you." Ren pressed a hand to her mouth, something warm and overwhelming rising in her chest. "He's really doing this," Lyra whispered, awed. The doors opened before Ren could answer, and Draven stood in the threshold, gold eyes finding her instantly across the corridor as though some invisible thread pulled his attention regardless of the room he stood in. "Come," he said, extending a hand. "They will accept it or they will not, but either way, I do not intend to make this decision without you standing beside me while I make it." Ren crossed the corridor and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and certain, and the council chamber fell silent as the two of them entered together. "I present to you," Draven said, addressing the assembled lords and advisors, his voice ringing with an authority that brooked no argument, "Ren Ashcombe, fated mate to the crown of Ravensmoor. My Luna, should she accept the title, and my equal in every matter of governance thereafter, regardless of what any accord written before either of us was born might claim otherwise." Counselor Aldrich opened his mouth to protest again, and then closed it, something in Draven's expression finally, fully silencing him. "There is one matter still unresolved," Draven added, turning to Ren, and for the first time since the vault corridor, uncertainty flickered across his face. The great predator suddenly achingly human. "I have claimed you before my council. I have not yet asked you. Ren Ashcombe, will you have me? Not the crown. Not the wolf. Me." Chapter 8. The claiming ceremony was set for the next full moon. Traditional, Draven explained, though he cared little for tradition beyond what let the bond settle properly under lunar light. Ren spent the intervening days learning her new territory, her new sister's laughter finally returning in full, easy peals throughout the keep's gardens, and learning, too, the strange new rhythm of loving a man built like a weapon who trembled, sometimes at the smallest unguarded moment of her affection. But peace she was learning, rarely arrived without one final storm. It came in the form of a letter delivered by a hooded messenger who vanished before the guards could question him, addressed to Counselor Aldrich and intercepted by Draven's own spymaster before it ever reached its intended hands. Ren stood in Draven's study as he read it, watching his jaw tighten with each line. "Corvin," he said finally, voice tight with restrained fury. "He did not simply flee into exile. He has gone to the Frost Reach, to Lord Malric, my father's oldest rival, a man who has spent 20 years waiting for an excuse to challenge my claim to this territory. Corvin has offered him proof, he claims, that I violated the exile terms of the old accords by refusing to honor his betrothal contract with your sister. That contract was forced from a terrified child. I know that. You know that. Malric does not care. He cares only for the excuse it provides to march on Ravensmoor's borders before the claiming ceremony solidifies my mate bond publicly, because a bond sealed before witnesses cannot be legally disputed, and a bond merely rumored can be twisted into whatever story serves his ambition." Ren's stomach dropped. "He means to attack before the full moon. He means to attack tomorrow." Draven set the letter down, and when he looked at her, the wolf was very close to the surface, gold bleeding fully into his eyes. "I will not let him reach these walls. But I need you to understand what tomorrow may cost, and I need to hear from your own mouth that you still choose this. Choose me, before I ride out to meet a threat that exists entirely because of the bond between us." Ren crossed the room and took his face in both hands, forcing his gaze to hers with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. "I broke into a fortress for someone I loved without knowing if I'd survive the night," she said. "I am not about to let fear of one more battle change what I already know is true. I choose you, Draven. Bond or no bond, ceremony or no ceremony. I chose you the moment you looked at a chained girl and chose mercy over convenience." Something in him broke open at that. Not weakness but relief, the terrible tension of a man who had expected perhaps, to be abandoned the moment the cost became visible. "Then I will end this tomorrow," he said, voice rough, "and I will come home to you." Chapter 9. The battle at Ravensmoor's northern border lasted less than an hour. Lord Malric had brought considerable numbers, banking on speed and surprise to breach the outer wall before Draven's forces could fully mobilize. But he had not accounted for a king fighting not for territory or pride, but for the woman waiting at the keep's heart, nor had he accounted for Ren Ashcombe riding out beside the healers' wagons rather than sheltering behind stone walls as any sensible captive-turned Luna might have chosen. She was there when Corvin, cornered amid the retreating chaos of Malric's broken lines, made one final desperate lunge, not at Draven, whose wolf form had already torn through half the invading force with a fury that left even his own guard giving him wide berth, but at Ren herself, blade drawn, screaming something about ruined debts and stolen leverage. He never reached her. Draven's guard captain took the blow meant for her shoulder, and Draven himself arrived a heartbeat later, shifting mid-leap, jaws closing with terrible finality. This time there was no offer of mercy. Corvin Ashvale's schemes ended in the frost-churned mud of the northern border, and Lord Malric, watching his supposed proof and his hired excuse both crumble in an instant, called his own retreat before Draven's fury turned toward him next. By the time the full moon rose 3 nights later, Ravensmoor's borders stood secure, its council silenced, and its king stood on the great balcony overlooking a courtyard filled with witnesses, nobles and commoners both, for Draven had insisted pointedly that this bond be sealed before everyone who might ever doubt it. Ren stood before him in silver and deep blue, Lyra beaming from the front row beside a girl she'd rescued together with the sister who'd once nearly lost everything to save her. "Before this court and this moon," Draven said, voice carrying across the silent courtyard, "I claim Ren Ashcombe as my Luna, my mate and my equal in every right this crown affords. Let any who doubt the bond witness it now." He tilted her head gently, baring the curve of her throat, and when his mark sealed against her skin, sharp, brief, searing and then warm as sunlight, Ren felt the bond settle fully into place, a tether she would never again need to question. The courtyard erupted into cheers. Later, alone on the balcony as the moon climbed high in silver over the mountains, Draven pulled her back against his chest, his arms circling her with a gentleness that still somehow startled her every time. "You broke into my vault to steal your sister back," he murmured against her hair. "I never imagined a thief could leave a king robbed of his own heart and grateful for the theft." Ren laughed, low and warm, and turned in his arms to face the man she had never planned to love and could no longer imagine living without. "Then it's a fair trade," she said. "You took my freedom that night in the corridor. I think it's only right I keep your heart in exchange." Thank you for listening to this story. Please like, share and comment where you are watching from, and also don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this every day. Thank you and God bless you as you do.